Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we venture deep into the untamed wilderness of British Columbia, a vast land of towering forests, frozen rivers, and isolated mountain valleys where help does not reach for miles. Hidden within these endless woods are 7 disturbing encounters, each one darker, stranger, and more terrifying than the last. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of British Columbia's wilderness, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this happened in the summer of 2019 while I was backpacking through a remote region of British Columbia's coastal wilderness. I've always loved the outdoors, hiking, camping, fishing, anything that got me away from cities and into the quiet of nature. That year, my friend Kyle convinced me to join him on a 4-day trek through an old logging region that had long since been reclaimed by forest. The place was miles away from the nearest town. According to the map, the logging roads hadn't been used in decades, which was exactly why Kyle wanted to go. Completely untouched, he said while we loaded our gear into his truck. No tourists, no noise, just us in the forest. At first, that sounded perfect. But the deeper we drove into the wilderness, the more something about the place started to feel wrong. The road narrowed into a cracked dirt path swallowed by trees. The forest became thicker, darker, and strangely silent. And about an hour before sunset, we saw something on the road ahead. Something that shouldn't have been there. At first, I thought it was a deer. Something tall and thin was standing about 40 yards ahead of the truck, partially hidden in the shadows between the trees. Kyle slowed the vehicle. "See that?" he muttered. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The figure didn't move, but it also didn't look like any animal I recognized. It was too tall, too still, and the way its shape bent around the trees made it hard to tell what I was even looking at. "Probably just a moose," Kyle said, though he didn't sound convinced. He tapped the horn lightly. The sound echoed through the quiet forest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shape slowly turned, not like an animal reacting to noise, more like something that had been watching us the entire time. Even from that distance, I could feel a strange unease crawl up my spine. Because whatever that thing was, it didn't run away. It stepped deeper into the trees, as if inviting us to continue down the road. Kyle kept driving. I remember asking him if maybe we should turn around, but he just shrugged and kept the truck moving forward along the cracked logging road. "Probably just some weird animal," he said. But the way he gripped the steering wheel told me he didn't really believe that. We passed the spot where the figure had been standing. The forest there was thick with old spruce trees, their branches tangled together like claws blocking the fading sunlight. I looked into the woods as we drove by, expecting to see movement. There was nothing. No animal, no sound, not even birds. The silence inside that forest felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on us. About 20 minutes later, we reached the end of the road where a small clearing opened near a shallow river. Kyle parked the truck and stepped out. "This'll be camp," he said. But as I grabbed my pack and looked back toward the dark wall of trees behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us here. We set up camp just before nightfall. Kyle pitched the tent while I gathered firewood from the edge of the clearing. The forest around us seemed endless, towering trees blocking most of the sky. Normally, I love that kind of wilderness silence, but this felt different. Too quiet. No wind moving the branches, no insects buzzing, just the faint sound of the river flowing behind us. Later that night, we sat beside the fire eating canned stew and joking about how creepy the drive had been. Kyle laughed and said, "If something's out there, it's probably more scared of us." That was when we heard it. A crack somewhere deep in the trees behind the campsite. Both of us froze. A few seconds later, another branch snapped. Slow, heavy, like something large was stepping carefully through the forest. Kyle grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the darkness. The beam cut through the trees, but showed nothing. And then we heard something that made the hair on my neck stand up. A slow, uneven breathing sound, coming from just beyond the edge of the firelight. Kyle slowly stood up from the log beside the fire. Neither of us spoke. That breathing sound continued somewhere in the darkness, just beyond the trees, slow and heavy, like whatever was out there had been running and was now catching its breath. Kyle lifted the flashlight again and stepped forward. "Hello?" he called out cautiously. The words seemed to disappear into the forest. No reply, just silence. Then another step in the darkness, a heavy crunch of leaves. The beam of Kyle's flashlight swept across the trees, branches, and rocks scattered along the forest floor. For a moment, I thought the woods were empty. Then the light passed over something tall between two trees, something that moved just slightly out of the beam. Kyle stopped walking. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I nodded slowly. It had been too tall to be a deer, too thin to be a bear. And whatever it was, it had been standing upright, watching us. Kyle slowly backed toward the fire. Neither of us took our eyes off the trees. "Probably a person," he said quietly, though his voice sounded uncertain. "Maybe another camper. But if it was another person, why hadn't they answered? And why were they hiding in the trees?" We both stood there listening. For a few seconds, the forest went completely still. Then suddenly something moved fast through the branches, not walking, not running, more like gliding between the trees. Kyle swung the flashlight wildly, trying to catch it in the beam, but whatever it was stayed just outside the light, circling, watching. And then it made a sound, a low clicking noise, not like an animal, not like a human. Something unfamiliar. Kyle immediately turned toward the tent. "We're not staying out here," he said. Within seconds, we both scrambled inside, zipping the tent shut while the fire crackled outside. But even inside the thin fabric shelter, we could still hear something moving slowly around the campsite. The next morning, neither of us said much. Kyle packed the tent quickly while I gathered the remaining supplies from the campsite. Neither of us wanted to stay in that clearing another minute. But before we left, I noticed something strange near the edge of the fire pit. Footprints. At first, I assumed they were ours. But when I looked closer, I realized they weren't. The prints were long and narrow, pressed deep into the dirt like something heavy had been standing there for a while. And they weren't shaped like boots or paws. They looked almost human, except each step was nearly twice the length of a normal stride. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They circled the campsite once, then disappeared into the forest. Kyle crouched beside me and stared at the marks. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," he whispered. I didn't answer, because deep down, I knew something had been standing right there in the darkness, watching us sleep. We left immediately after that. Kyle started the truck and turned it around on the narrow logging road, while I kept scanning the trees with the flashlight. Even though it was morning, the forest still looked dark and oppressive. As we drove away, Neither of us spoke for a long time. About 30 minutes later, we reached the stretch of road where we had first seen that tall shape standing between the trees. Kyle slowed down. "Look," he said quietly. There was something carved into the trunk of a dead pine beside the road. 3 deep marks, long, parallel, like claws had been dragged slowly down the bark. The cuts were fresh. Sap still leaked from the wood. But that wasn't the worst part. Because beneath the marks, someone had scratched words into the tree. The letters were crooked and uneven, like they had been carved in a hurry. I leaned out the window and read them aloud. And the moment I did, Kyle slammed the gas pedal, because the message said only 3 words. "Stay out of here." By the time the sky began turning gray with early morning light, neither of us had slept. The sounds around the campsite had stopped about an hour before dawn. Whatever had been circling us during the night had eventually gone quiet. But that didn't make us feel safer. If anything, the silence felt worse. Kyle slowly unzipped the tent and peeked outside. The fire had burned down to cold ashes. The forest looked calm again, almost peaceful in the pale morning light. For a moment, it felt like maybe we had imagined everything. Then Kyle stepped outside and suddenly froze. "Daniel," he said quietly. I crawled out of the tent and walked over. The dirt around the campsite was covered in footprints. But they weren't animal tracks, and they weren't human either. Each print was long and narrow, almost like a stretched human foot. But the stride between them was impossible, nearly 6 feet apart. Whatever had walked around our tent all night had been much taller than any person. We packed our gear faster than I've ever packed anything in my life. Neither of us spoke much as we threw everything into the truck. The forest looked normal again. Birds had started chirping. Sunlight filtered through the trees. But that didn't make the tracks disappear. They continued from the campsite straight into the woods, and then, strangely, back toward the road we had driven in on. Kyle started the engine, and we drove out of there without stopping once. For the first 30 minutes, neither of us said anything. Then Kyle finally spoke. "You remember that thing we saw on the road yesterday?" I nodded slowly. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Those footprints," he said quietly. "They started before the campsite." I felt my stomach drop, because that meant something I hadn't considered before. Whatever had been walking around our tent all night hadn't just found us in the forest. It had been following us since the road. My name is Ethan Calloway, and this happened in October of 2021 while I was working as a wildlife photographer in the mountains of British Columbia. For most of my career, I've spent weeks at a time deep in the wilderness, documenting animals most people never get the chance to see. Wolves, mountain lions, even the occasional grizzly. That fall, I had been tracking a rare pack of coastal wolves rumored to roam near an isolated valley north of Vancouver Island. The only place to stay in the area was an old forestry cabin about 10 miles from the nearest road. It was exactly the kind of remote location I needed. No tourists, no noise, just forest stretching endlessly in every direction. The cabin itself looked like it hadn't been used in years. The wood siding was weathered and gray, and the windows were dusty from neglect. But the door wasn't locked, which struck me as strange, because places this remote are usually sealed shut. And yet, someone had left it open. Inside, the cabin smelled like dust and old wood. Sunlight filtered weakly through the dirty windows, casting pale streaks across the floorboards. There wasn't much inside. Just a small iron stove, a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bunk bed against the wall. It looked abandoned. But as I walked deeper into the room, something caught my attention. The fireplace. Ash. Fresh ash. Not weeks old, not months old. Fresh. Someone had used the stove recently. I slowly turned around, scanning the empty cabin. No sleeping bag, no food supplies, no gear. If someone had stayed here recently, they had taken everything with them. Except for one thing. Carved into the wooden wall beside the bunk bed were dozens of small marks. Not scratches, not random cuts. They were tally marks, carefully carved into the wood, row after row after row, like someone had been counting the days. I stood there staring at the tally marks for a long time. There were hundreds of them carved into the wood, arranged in small groups like someone had been keeping track of something day by day. 5 marks, then another 5, then another. Whoever had stayed here hadn't just visited the cabin, they had lived here for a long time. I ran my fingers lightly across the grooves in the wood. Some of the cuts looked old, but the last few marks near the end were clean and sharp. Recent. That meant someone had been here not long before I arrived. Maybe a hunter, maybe another photographer. Still, the thought made the cabin feel less empty and somehow more unsettling. I tried to shrug it off and unpacked my camera gear on the table. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly down the mountain slopes, thick with cedar and pine. Perfect territory for wolves. But as I stepped outside to set up one of my trail cameras near the tree line, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that someone else in those woods was watching the cabin. Night came quickly in the mountains. By the time the sun dropped behind the tree line, the forest outside the cabin had turned into a wall of darkness. I lit the small oil lantern inside and started a fire in the iron stove. The warm glow helped a little, but the cabin still felt strange, like it wasn't meant to be empty. Around midnight, I was reviewing some camera equipment when I heard something outside. A faint crunch of gravel, right outside the cabin. At first, I thought it might be a deer wandering near the clearing. But then I heard it again. Another step. Slow, deliberate. I quietly moved toward the window and carefully lifted the corner of the dusty curtain. The forest outside was pitch black. The lantern light barely reached beyond the porch. For several seconds, I saw nothing. Then something moved at the edge of the trees. A tall shadow shifted between the trunks, and the moment my eyes focused on it, the shadow slowly stepped back into the darkness. Night came quickly in the mountains. By the time the sun disappeared behind the tree line, the forest outside the cabin had turned into a wall of darkness. I lit a small lantern and sat at the wooden table reviewing the photos I'd taken that afternoon. But my attention kept drifting back to those tally marks carved into the wall. There had to be at least 100 of them, maybe more. Whoever had been staying here had spent a long time inside this cabin, counting the days. Around midnight, I finally climbed into the bunk bed and tried to sleep. The wind outside had picked up, making the tall trees creak and sway. For a while, that was the only sound. Then something new joined it. Footsteps. Slow, crunching softly on the gravel outside the cabin. I sat up immediately, holding my breath. The steps moved around the outside wall, stopping briefly beneath the window. And then, very slowly, something tapped twice against the glass. I stayed completely still in the bunk, listening. The tapping on the window didn't happen again, but the footsteps continued, slowly circling the cabin. Step, crunch, step, crunch. Whoever or whatever was outside wasn't trying to break in. It was just walking, like it was checking the walls, the windows, the door. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was another hiker who had found the cabin and wanted shelter. But if that were true, why not knock on the door? Why creep around the cabin in the middle of the night? Finally, I forced myself to get up and grab my flashlight. My heart was pounding as I moved quietly toward the window. I took a breath and pulled the curtain aside. For a moment, I saw nothing but darkness. Then the beam of my flashlight caught something near the tree line. A tall figure, standing completely still, watching the cabin. And the second the light touched it, it stepped silently back into the forest. The rest of the night felt endless. I stayed awake sitting on the edge of the bunk, listening to every sound outside the cabin. The forest had gone completely silent again, just like it had earlier. For a while, nothing happened. Then around 3 in the morning, I heard something that made my chest tighten. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps moving across the wooden porch outside. They stopped directly in front of the cabin door. I froze. The thin wooden walls suddenly felt like paper between me and whatever was standing outside. A few seconds passed. Then I heard something strange. A slow dragging sound across the door, like fingernails scraping gently along the wood. Not banging, not trying to break in, just slowly dragging across the surface. I held my breath and stared at the door. The lantern light flickered slightly in the cabin. And then, just before the sound stopped, something outside the door let out a quiet, raspy breath. I didn't move for a long time after that. Eventually, the footsteps returned, slowly walking away from the cabin and disappearing back into the forest. But I didn't dare open the door, not until morning. When the sun finally rose over the mountains, I stepped outside cautiously and looked around the clearing. The forest looked peaceful again. Birds chirped in the trees, and sunlight warmed the damp ground. But the cabin door told a different story. 4 long scratches had been carved into the wood during the night. They were deep enough to cut through the outer layer of paint and into the timber underneath. I crouched down and examined the ground near the porch. That's when I saw the tracks. Footprints. But they didn't look like boots. They looked human, except the toes were wrong. Too long, too thin, and the stride between them was enormous. The tracks led away from the cabin and straight toward the trail camera I had set up the day before. I walked toward the trail camera slowly, my boots crunching softly on the gravel path leading into the trees. The footprints were still there. Long, thin impressions in the dirt that looked almost human. Except the toes were stretched and narrow, like something had forced its feet into the wrong shape. The tracks led directly to the tree where my camera had been strapped the day before. But when I reached it, my stomach dropped. The camera was gone. The strap had been torn clean off the trunk. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. Animals don't remove trail cameras, and people don't usually steal them in the middle of the wilderness without leaving other tracks behind. Then I noticed something hanging from a branch above me. A small black object swaying gently in the wind. My trail camera. Someone, or something, had hung it up nearly 10 feet off the ground, like it wanted me to find it. It took me a minute to reach the camera. I had to climb halfway up the tree to grab it. My hands were shaking slightly as I climbed back down and turned the device on. Trail cameras automatically record short video clips whenever something moves in front of the lens, meaning whatever had walked past it last night should still be stored on the memory card. I stepped back toward the cabin porch and scrolled through the recordings. The first few clips were normal. Wind moving branches, a deer walking through the clearing. Then I opened the final video recorded at 3:12 a.m. At first, the screen showed nothing but darkness and trees. Then, a tall figure slowly stepped into view. It stood directly in front of the camera for several seconds. Its body looked thin and wrong, with long arms hanging nearly to its knees. But the worst part wasn't its shape. It was its face. Because the creature leaned close to the camera and whispered something softly into the microphone. 3 words. You took my place. My name is Samantha Reed, and this happened during the winter of 2018 in the remote backcountry of British Columbia. I'm an experienced hiker, but I've always been drawn to the more extreme conditions: snow-covered trails, icy cliffs, and frozen lakes. That year, I joined a small group of hikers for a weekend trek in the Monashee Mountains, far from any marked trails. The group consisted of 3 people: me, Mark, who was leading the hike, and Jenna, my childhood friend. We all knew the risks: blizzards, avalanches, and bitter cold. But nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered. On the first night, we set up camp on a small plateau overlooking a frozen river valley. The wind howled through the trees, rattling branches and making the snow drift like waves on an ocean. We thought we were alone. We were wrong. Because as darkness fell, we noticed something, or someone, moving across the snowy slope below us. Slowly, silently, watching. We froze when we first saw it. At first, I thought it was another hiker who had lost their way. But the figure didn't move like a person. Its steps were uneven and jerky, almost like it was gliding over the snow rather than walking. Mark whispered, "Stay quiet. It might just pass by." We huddled together behind a small cluster of rocks, watching as the shadow moved closer. The snow reflected a faint glow from the nearly full moon, and we could just make out its shape. It was tall, impossibly thin, with long arms that swung loosely at its sides. Its head was slightly tilted, as if it were inspecting us, studying our every move. Jenna let out a soft gasp, and it froze. The figure turned slowly toward us, but didn't make a sound. Just stood there, watching, waiting. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Something about the figure felt unnatural. It wasn't human, and it wasn't alone. We didn't move. The wind howled through the plateau, carrying a biting cold that cut through our jackets. But the figure stayed still, just beyond the edge of the slope. After what felt like an eternity, it finally started moving again. Slow, deliberate steps that didn't disturb the snow much. It almost glided. Mark finally whispered, "We need to get inside the tent now." We scrambled to our small canvas shelter, trying to stay as low as possible, the snow crunching beneath our boots with every hurried step. The figure seemed to pause with each noise we made, like it was calculating how to react. Inside the tent, we huddled together, listening. The faintest scraping sound came from outside, maybe a branch brushing against the tent, or maybe something larger. We dared not unzip the tent. Minutes passed, then a shadow fell across the thin fabric. Something tall, impossibly thin, standing directly above the tent, and I heard it breathe. Slow, wet, heavy, something inhuman. We stayed frozen for what felt like hours, the sound of our own breathing loud in the small tent. Eventually, Mark whispered, "We have to move before it follows us." I nodded silently, my hands shaking as I helped Jenna gather their gear. The moment we unzipped the tent, the wind slammed against us, cold as ice. The slope below was empty, at first glance anyway. The figure had vanished, but the snow told a story. Footprints, long, narrow, uneven strides leading straight toward the tree line, then vanishing without a trace. We didn't know what to make of it. Mark grabbed our headlamps, and we moved cautiously down the slope toward the forest, sticking close together. Every snapped of branch, every rustle of snow underfoot made us flinch. And then, as we reached a small copse of trees, we noticed them, more footprints. Not ours, not animal. They surrounded us. As if the figure hadn't just been observing, it had been tracking us the entire time. We pressed deeper into the trees, our headlamps cutting pale cones of light through the dense pines. Every step was careful, slow, trying not to make a sound. But the crunch of snow under our boots echoed like thunder in the still winter night. Then I heard it, a faint whistling sound, not from the wind, not from any animal I'd ever heard. It was high-pitched, eerie, and impossible to place. Mark froze. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Jenna clutched my arm. It's following us," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't need to look behind me to know she was right. I could feel it. Heavy, calculated steps crunching softly in the snow somewhere just beyond our light. We didn't run. We couldn't. The trees were thick, the snow deep. The figure could move silently between them, and we couldn't see it. And then we saw the first sign. A tall shadow moving between the trees, gliding closer, stopping whenever our lights passed over it, like a predator playing with its prey. We pressed on, hearts pounding, snow clinging to our boots. The whistling sound continued, now accompanied by a subtle scraping noise, like claws dragging across frozen branches somewhere above us. "Mark, what is it?" Jenna gasped. I shook my head, too afraid to answer. The shadow appeared again, this time closer. Between two tall pines, it paused, staring at us. Its limbs were unnaturally long, hands dangling toward the snow, almost brushing the tips of the branches. Its face remained hidden in darkness, but I could feel its gaze burning into me. Then, without warning, it moved. Swift, silent, almost gliding through the trees. We stumbled over a fallen log, scrambling to keep our balance, and that was enough. The figure stopped, tilted its head, and seemed to study us. I realized in that moment, this wasn't just observing. It was herding us, guiding us deeper into the wilderness. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I understood that if we didn't follow, it might decide we weren't worth letting live. By now, the night had become almost unbearable. The wind whipped through the trees, cutting through our layers of clothing, and the forest seemed alive with movement. Shadows flickering, snow shaking from branches, and the distant whistling echoing through the valley. We stumbled over a snowdrift and nearly fell, and that's when I saw something even worse. Another shadow. This one slightly smaller, but identical in shape. Tall, thin, unnaturally elongated arms, head tilted unnervingly. It wasn't alone. The first figure was still behind us, guiding, watching. The second had appeared ahead of us, blocking our path. We froze. For a moment, I thought about running. But the snow was deep, our muscles exhausted, and we couldn't tell if more were hidden in the trees. The second figure lifted one long, thin arm and pointed directly at us. And that's when I realized we weren't being followed. We were being herded. Somewhere deep in the forest, these creatures had a plan. We tried to move sideways, weaving between trees, but the figures mirrored every step. No sound, no footprints in the snow besides the ones we left behind. It was as if the forest itself had become a trap. Jenna whimpered softly behind me, and Mark muttered, "We're trapped." They're controlling this place. I didn't argue. The shadows were silent, patient, almost intelligent. Every time we attempted to change direction, they shifted in perfect synchrony, forcing us toward a narrow gully that sloped down to a frozen creek. Our breaths came out in white puffs. Our muscles were burning from exhaustion. The gully narrowed further, hemmed in by ice-covered rocks. I glanced up. Both figures were watching from above now. Standing on higher ground, their long limbs unnaturally balanced on the frozen slopes. The realization hit me like a knife. These creatures weren't just stalking us. They had planned this entire encounter. And no matter which way we turned, they had the advantage. The cold gnawed at us, but fear gnawed harder. We moved as one, slowly, trying to stay low and silent. Every instinct screamed to run, but we knew it would be useless. The figures mirrored every movement, gliding through snow like ghosts. Then I saw something I'll never forget. A third shadow appeared at the edge of the gully. Taller than the others, its presence somehow more oppressive. It didn't move like the first two. It hovered, as if suspended by some unnatural force. The first two figures seemed to defer to it, stopping in perfect alignment. I realized then that they weren't just hunting us. They were organized. The third figure tilted its head and made a faint whistling sound, high-pitched like metal scraping glass. The snow beneath us vibrated slightly. Jenna cried out softly. The third figure stepped forward. The first two mirrored it. We were surrounded, completely. No escape. And for the first time, I understood what the tally marks at the cabin might have meant. We were next. We huddled together, shivering, not from cold, but from terror. The central figure made a slow, circling motion, almost like inspecting its prey. Its head tilted unnaturally, and I could swear I saw faint glimmers where its eyes would have been. Then it reached out one impossibly long arm. The first two figures mirrored it perfectly. The snow beneath our boots cracked as if frozen to ice deeper than the gully. Mark whispered, "We can't fight them. We need to run." I nodded, and in a sudden burst of courage, we bolted toward the forest edge, diving between the trees. The figures followed, gliding, silent but deadly. We ran blindly, snow flying, hearts hammering, until we finally broke into a small clearing by a frozen river. And that's when I saw it. The central figure paused at the edge of the trees, head tilted toward us, whistling softly. Then it vanished. The first two figures melted into the shadows behind it. We made it back to civilization, but I never forgot the final words that echoed in my mind that night. The forest keeps what it claims. My name is Liam Turner, and this happened in the summer of 2019 while I was exploring the remote lakes of British Columbia for a photography project. I've always loved canoeing. There's a strange peace in gliding across a still lake surrounded by mountains and forests, away from the chaos of civilization. That summer, I decided to paddle alone across Wells Gray Provincial Park, a place known for its dense wilderness and hidden coves. The morning started peacefully. The lake was perfectly still, mist rising off the water as the sun slowly illuminated the peaks around me. Birds called softly from the shoreline, and fish occasionally broke the surface, leaving small ripples that faded quickly. But as I reached a narrow inlet surrounded by thick cedar and spruce, something felt off. The water grew darker. The trees seemed too still. And far across the inlet, I noticed movement. A canoe, silently gliding without a sound. It wasn't like any canoe I'd seen before. It seemed abandoned. And yet, someone or something was inside. I froze in my canoe, gripping the paddle tightly. The other canoe was gliding silently, perfectly straight, as if guided by something unseen. There was no sound of paddling, no wake behind it, just smooth, unnatural motion. Curiosity overpowered caution. I nudged my canoe closer, peering into the shadows inside the craft. It was empty. No person, no gear, nothing. And yet, the canoe moved as if someone were steering it. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I considered turning back, but something compelled me forward, an urge I couldn't explain. Then I noticed something even stranger. The water beneath the canoe seemed to ripple unnaturally, as if disturbed by something beneath the surface. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the lake. A long, thin shape moving faster than any fish or animal could swim. It disappeared beneath the surface just as the canoe seemed to respond, turning slowly toward me. I realized then, this lake was not empty. Something was watching. I gripped my paddle tighter, my knuckles white. The empty canoe continued its slow approach, almost gliding over the water as if it were alive. Every instinct in me screamed to turn back, but something, curiosity or sheer disbelief, kept me rooted in place. The shadow beneath the water moved again, faster this time. It was long, thin, almost serpentine, yet unmistakably deliberate, like it was steering the canoe toward me. A sudden ripple spread across the surface of the lake. My heart jumped as I saw the reflection of something enormous beneath the canoe. Too wide to be a fish, its contours blurred in the dark water. I tried to paddle away, but my canoe seemed sluggish, heavy, as if the water itself was resisting me. The mist thickened around the inlet, turning the world into a gray blur. Then I heard it. A soft, almost human-like whisper carried across the water, chilling me to the bone. "Come." Closer. I froze. The whisper had sounded soft, almost inviting. But there was something in it that was wrong, unnatural, hollow. I tried to paddle backward, but the water felt thick, almost sticky, slowing every stroke. The empty canoe now floated within a few yards of me, perfectly aligned, as if it had been waiting. The shadow beneath it writhed slowly, coiling like a snake. I could see its length stretching impossibly, limbs or tentacles undulating beneath the surface. My mind screamed to turn and flee to the shore, but I was paralyzed with fear and disbelief. Then the whisper came again, louder. "Join me." I noticed the canoe's bow lift slightly, as if something or someone was about to emerge. I paddled with everything I had, desperate to escape, but the shadow followed, faster than anything natural, its presence pressing on me like icy hands from beneath. For the first time, I realized I might not make it out of the lake alive. The lake seemed to come alive around me. Every stroke of my paddle met resistance, as though invisible hands were holding me in place. The mist thickened, turning the trees and distant cliffs into shadowy shapes that wavered like phantoms. The empty canoe hovered just a few feet from mine now, moving slowly but with purpose, guided by whatever lurked beneath. Then the water erupted. A massive shadow rose just beneath the surface, sending icy spray across my face. I could barely make out a shape, elongated limbs, twisting and coiling like nothing I had ever seen. Panic surged through me. I tried to shout, but the mist swallowed my voice. The whisper came again, this time all around me. "Closer. Join me." I realized it wasn't coming from the canoe. It wasn't coming from the surface. It was coming from the water itself. And for a moment, I understood the truth. The lake didn't just contain something. It was something. The water boiled beneath the empty canoe. I saw it clearly now. a massive, twisted form. Humanoid, yet impossibly long and sinuous, stretching across the lake. Its limbs moved with the speed and precision of a predator, guiding the canoe toward me. I paddled furiously, my arms burning, but it was no use. Every stroke forward seemed to push me sideways instead, keeping me trapped in the misty inlet. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, echoing in my skull. "Come. Closer. Join me." Then the surface of the lake cracked, not like ice, like skin, rippling and folding in on itself. The empty canoe lurched violently toward me, and I could see now that it wasn't empty at all. Something dark crouched in its center, featureless except for its eyes, small, deep black pits that seemed to drain the light. I understood with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity. This was not a creature I could fight or outrun. It was the lake, and it wanted me. I felt the cold wrap around me like a living thing. The water beneath my canoe surged, lifting the bow as if the lake itself were trying to swallow me. The empty canoe drifted closer, guided by the massive shadow beneath, and the mist thickened until the surrounding forest disappeared entirely. I could barely see my own hands in front of me, and the whispering grew deafening, inside my head, around me, everywhere. Closer, closer. Panic set in. I tried to paddle back toward the open water, towards safety, but the lake resisted. My canoe swerved violently, almost tipping me into the icy water. And then I noticed the water around the approaching empty canoe. It wasn't just moving, it was morphing. Ripples rose into shapes, twisting into elongated, humanoid forms that stretched out of the surface, like the lake itself was becoming a body. I realized in horror. Whatever was controlling the canoe wasn't hiding. It was revealing itself. The empty canoe stopped just a few feet away. The dark figure crouched inside rose slowly, tall and featureless, its black eyes staring into me, absorbing the light around it. The water around us bubbled and churned, forming shapes that seemed to stretch out toward my canoe, testing, probing, trying to grab. I paddled frantically, but the lake fought me at every stroke. Waves surged unnaturally, slamming against the sides of my canoe, splashing icy water into my face. I could hear the whispers louder now, like a chorus. "Join, join, join." The lake's surface seemed to ripple and coil like flesh, guiding the empty canoe closer. I realized then that it wasn't trying to scare me. It was hurting me, like a predator guiding prey to the edge of a trap. And no matter how I tried to escape, every move I made brought me closer to the center of the lake, toward the dark figure. I understood in that moment that this was more than a lake. It was alive. I could feel the lake pressing against me, ice cold and alive, every stroke of my paddle resisted by unseen forces. The mist thickened until the shoreline was gone. I was trapped. The empty canoe floated mere feet away, the featureless figure inside rising fully now. Its black eyes seemed to pierce my very mind, and the water around it writhed like a living thing, forming long, twisting arms that reached toward me. I realized then what it wanted. The lake wasn't just guiding the canoe. It was trying to merge me with it, pull me into its depths, to become part of the endless dark water that had claimed so many before. The whispers grew deafening, echoing inside my skull. "Join, join, join." I paddled with everything I had, desperate, ignoring the icy waves lapping against my arms and chest. The empty canoe surged forward as if propelled by the lake itself. I was moments from being overtaken. And then, something snapped. With one final desperate stroke, I slammed my paddle down into the water, and the lake reacted violently. The waves surged around me, icy water spraying into my face. But somehow the force pushed me forward, away from the empty canoe and the dark figure inside. The whispers reached a fevered pitch, shrieking inside my mind. "No, you cannot leave. Join, join, join." I paddled blindly, breaking through the thickest part of the mist. Suddenly, the forest appeared ahead, the shoreline rising like a lifeline. The dark figure in the empty canoe lingered at the edge of the mist, watching me flee, its black eyes unblinking. The lake calmed as I reached shallow water and scrambled onto the rocky shore. Shivering, gasping, soaked to the bone. I turned back once. The empty canoe had vanished, as if the water itself had swallowed it whole. I never returned to that lake. But sometimes at night, I hear a faint whisper in my dreams. The lake remembers, and it waits. My name is Ethan Marshall, and this happened in late autumn of 2020 during a solo backpacking trip in the remote wilderness of British Columbia. I've always sought isolation in the forests, away from trails and tourists, where the only sounds are wind, leaves, and my own footsteps. That weekend, I aimed to explore a series of abandoned logging roads deep in the Caribou Mountains. The first day went perfectly. Sunlight filtered through amber leaves, and the smell of damp pine filled the air. I set up camp near a small creek that gurgled softly in the fading light. But as night fell, the forest changed. The usual sounds of nocturnal animals quieted, leaving only the wind whispering through the trees. Then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps echoing through the woods. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but I was certain I had the entire area to myself. The footsteps were deliberate, steady, and approaching, and they weren't coming from the trail. I froze, straining to hear. The tapping continued, closer now, but not on the ground I was on. The sound seemed to circle my campsite, moving through the underbrush with a rhythm that felt almost intelligent. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the surrounding trees. Branches swayed, but I saw nothing. "Hello?" I called softly, my voice trembling more than I expected. Silence answered me, except for the footsteps, now unmistakably matching the pace of my heartbeat. Panic prickled at the back of my neck. Then I heard another sound, soft breathing, almost synchronized with the tapping. I swung my flashlight toward the noise. The beam caught nothing but shadows. I realized something horrifying. These were not human footsteps. They moved with precision and silence, through leaves, branches, and underbrush, leaving no disturbance. And they weren't just approaching. They were surrounding me. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight trained on the shadows. The tapping never stopped. Each step was deliberate, echoing unnaturally through the trees, as if the forest itself had picked up a rhythm and was mimicking life. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a large raccoon. But the cadence, the weight of the steps, felt far too deliberate. Then I noticed it. The sound wasn't coming from the ground. It bounced between the trees, higher than it should, like someone, or something, was walking on branches above me. A low breeze stirred the leaves, but the movement above wasn't wind. I tried to stay calm. I whispered my own movements aloud, thinking maybe it would stop, but the footsteps shifted in response, moving faster then slower, perfectly synchronized with me. Fear gnawed at my chest. Then, from behind a large cedar, I glimpsed it. Tall, thin, hunched slightly, limbs moving too fluidly, shadows stretching unnaturally. It was watching, and it knew I had seen it. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, my flashlight trembling in my hands. The figure didn't move toward me in the usual sense. It glided, limbs unnaturally bending, following my every movement without a sound. The forest seemed alive around me. Shadows stretched unnaturally, branches twisting as if reaching out. I tried to call for help, my voice cracking, but the echo returned only distorted, layered with faint whispers. The footsteps multiplied. I could hear them circling, sometimes above, sometimes beside me, always moving, never pausing. I realized with growing horror, this wasn't just one entity. There were more, perhaps dozens, hidden in the darkness, perfectly silent, surrounding me completely. I tried to shine my flashlight on every tree, every bush, but the beam seemed absorbed by the shadows. Then the closest figure moved closer, its face, or lack thereof, just a dark void, stretching taller than any human, tilting slightly as if assessing me. I knew in that moment I was not alone, and escape would not be easy. I ran. The forest seemed endless, but I didn't care. Every branch that snagged my jacket, every root that threatened to trip me only fueled my panic. The footsteps followed, closer, faster, circling me like predators playing with prey. I glanced back and caught a fleeting glimpse of one figure gliding between the trees. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, shadows stretching taller than the surrounding pines. I had no idea how it moved so silently, yet it always remained just behind me, always watching. The whispers returned, soft at first, then rising to a chorus, echoing through the forest. "Join, join, join." My flashlight flickered. The darkness felt alive, pressing in on all sides. I knew I couldn't run forever. I needed a plan. Somewhere in the distance, a faint glow caught my eye. What looked like an old ranger's cabin, barely visible through the trees. I ran toward it, hoping for safety, but the footsteps multiplied. They were everywhere. And I realized then the forest had decided I couldn't leave easily. The cabin grew closer, but the forest itself seemed determined to keep me from reaching it. Branches lashed at my face, roots grabbed at my boots, and the underbrush thickened unnaturally. The footsteps followed relentlessly, circling, pacing, taunting. I stumbled inside the cabin, slamming the door behind me. The faint glow from an old lantern illuminated the interior, dusty, abandoned, with overturned chairs and broken windows. For a moment, I felt relief. But the forest didn't stop. From the shattered window, shadows began to creep along the walls. The footsteps echoed inside now, louder than outside, coming from all directions. I pressed my back against the door. My heart pounded as I realized something terrifying. The figures didn't need to enter the cabin to trap me. The forest itself had become them. I could hear the whispers, now almost intelligible. "You cannot escape. The forest remembers." I understood then that the woods weren't just haunted, they were hungry, and I was the latest visitor. I pressed myself against the door, trying to slow my breathing. Every creak of the cabin floorboards sounded like a shout in the oppressive silence. The footsteps outside seemed to pause and shift, moving with intelligence, almost as if they were aware of my attempts to hide. Then the whispering changed, no longer soft, but urgent, insistent, echoing in my head. "Come, out, join." I peeked through a gap in the boarded-up window. The figures had multiplied, shadows moved between the trees with impossible fluidity, limbs bending in unnatural ways, forming a wall of darkness around the cabin. I realized I had only one chance. If I stayed, the forest would close in, and I wouldn't survive the night. If I ran, the figures would follow, relentless, knowing every movement I made. The choice was terrifyingly clear. Fight my instincts and run into the darkness, or be consumed by it. I gathered every ounce of courage and opened the door. I bolted into the darkness, heart hammering, limbs burning. The shadows followed immediately, gliding over the forest floor, moving faster than anything natural. The whispering escalated to a deafening chorus, filling my mind with distorted words, echoing, overlapping. You cannot leave. You belong. Join. Branches snagged my clothes. Roots tripped me, yet I kept moving, driven by sheer terror. The cabin disappeared behind me, swallowed by the mist and shadows. Then I stumbled into a clearing. Moonlight filtered through the trees, giving me a momentary sense of space. But the shadows didn't hesitate. They spread across the clearing like liquid darkness, coiling and stretching, forming shapes that mimicked the figures I had glimpsed in the trees. I realized with horror, the forest itself was hunting, using the shadows as extensions of its will. There was no escape, only the illusion of it. And still, the whispers followed, louder than my own screams. Join, join, join! I ran blindly through the clearing, branches lashing at my face, the cold night air burning my lungs. The shadow figures were everywhere, gliding, stretching, their long limbs bending unnaturally, wrapping around trees, creeping along the forest floor, closing in on me. The whispers filled my mind, a chorus of distorted voices urging me to stop, to surrender, to join. I tripped over a root, sprawling onto the damp leaves. My flashlight skidded across the ground, briefly illuminating dozens of dark forms converging on me. Eyes empty voids reflecting nothing but darkness. Panic overtook reason. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the sound of running water, maybe a stream, maybe safety. The shadows surged after me, faster than I thought possible, flowing over the forest floor like living ink. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the forest itself resisted my escape. I realized then, the forest didn't just hunt. It played with you, testing fear, stretching terror, preparing to claim its next victim. I reached the stream, icy water rushing past, and dove in without hesitation. The cold shocked my body, but I kept moving, letting the current pull me downstream. The shadows paused at the edge of the water, their forms hovering above, stretching impossibly long to follow me. But the current seemed to slow them. I floated for what felt like hours, exhaustion and fear gripping me, listening to the echoes of footsteps behind me, the forest claiming its presence, even if it couldn't touch me in the water. Eventually, the mist thinned, and I stumbled onto the far bank, soaked and shaking. The forest was silent now, as if it had lost interest. I looked back once. The shadows were gone, but the whispers lingered faintly in my ears. You cannot leave. We remember. I never returned to those woods, and I never hiked alone again. But even years later, I hear faint tapping outside my window, and I know the forest remembers. It waits. My name is Sophie Reynolds, and this happened during a late winter solo retreat into the wilderness of British Columbia. I had been hiking for 2 days, seeking solitude and a break from city life. The forest was thick with spruce and cedar, and a low fog hung over the frozen ground, giving the landscape an almost otherworldly feel. My goal was simple: reach a small, unmarked cabin I had read about in an old hiking journal, a place untouched by tourists or modern life. The first day was uneventful. I set up camp near a frozen creek and marveled at the quiet beauty of the mist-shrouded forest. But as dusk fell, the fog thickened, and an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. From somewhere deeper in the trees, I heard it. Faint, deliberate knocks. 3 slow raps, then a pause, then 3 more. I froze, staring into the gray whiteness around me, realizing with a chill that the sounds were coming from the direction of the cabin. I approached the cabin cautiously, each step crunching on frozen leaves. The knocks stopped as I drew near, leaving an unnatural silence in their place. My breath formed clouds in the cold air, and I realized that despite the isolation, I was not alone. The cabin door was slightly ajar, swinging slowly with the wind, though the forest was otherwise still. I gripped my backpack strap tightly and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was stale, the faint smell of smoke lingering despite no fire burning. Dust coated the furniture, but oddly, the floorboards bore fresh footprints, leading to a small, broken window at the back. I took a step forward, and the door slammed shut behind me, making me jump. The faint knocking resumed, this time from inside the walls themselves, echoing around the cabin. Panic rose in my chest. Whoever or whatever was here knew I had arrived. And the cabin, I realized with growing horror, wasn't abandoned after all. I backed away from the door, heart hammering, flashlight in hand. The knocking continued, rhythmic now, but irregular, like a message I couldn't understand. Each rap echoed through the wooden beams, reverberating inside my skull. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the wind or a loose shutter. Then I saw movement. A shadow flitted across the far wall, too tall and distorted to be human. It lingered at the edge of the cabin, vanishing whenever I pointed my flashlight directly at it. My stomach churned as I realized the footprints on the floor were shifting. They weren't just fresh. They were moving, slowly forming a circle around me, as if guiding me to the center of the room. I tried to leave through the back window, but the pane wouldn't budge. The cabin was small, claustrophobic, and somehow alive. The knocking changed again, now coming from inside the walls, closer, sharper, and more deliberate. Something was trapped in the cabin with me. I could hear faint whispers, unintelligible at first, but slowly forming words that sent chills down my spine. You shouldn't be here. The temperature dropped suddenly, and my breath turned to mist. My flashlight flickered, plunging the cabin into darkness for brief, terrifying moments. Each flicker revealed glimpses of something tall, hunched, and unnatural lurking near the corners. I backed toward the center of the cabin, trying to keep sight of every shadow. The knocking accelerated, now accompanied by a low, grinding sound coming from beneath the floorboards. I realized with horror that the cabin itself seemed to pulse, almost breathing, responding to my presence. The whispers became a chant, echoing through the beams and walls, and the shadows began to move independently, stretching toward me with impossibly long limbs. Panic overtook me. I realized I couldn't stay here. Whatever haunted this cabin was not content to wait for me to leave calmly. It wanted me to run, but it wanted to control where I ran. I grabbed my backpack, fumbling for my map and compass, desperate for a way out. The whispers had grown louder, now a chorus echoing through the walls, chanting, taunting, repeating, "You cannot leave. You cannot leave." The shadows around the cabin shifted again, elongating, crawling along the walls and floor. One of them detached itself and moved toward me, its form flickering like smoke, limbs bending in impossible ways. I stumbled back, tripping over a chair. My flashlight fell, spinning beams across the room, illuminating glimpses of dark figures that seemed to melt into the corners the moment I looked directly at them. I knew I couldn't wait for the fog outside to guide me safely. The cabin had become a trap, a predator waiting patiently for prey to make a wrong move. I needed to fight my fear and escape before the entity claimed me entirely. Summoning every ounce of courage, I headed for the back door, heart pounding, praying the fog would hide me. The back door resisted. The handle turned in my hand, but it felt like it was welded shut by unseen force. The shadows moved faster now, converging on me, coalescing into a tall, hunched figure with elongated arms stretching across the floor and walls. The whispers merged into a single, chilling voice. "You belong here. Forever." I slammed my shoulder against the door. The wood groaned and gave way slightly, but the figure advanced with unnatural speed. I didn't think. I pushed harder, throwing my full weight against it. It swung its long limbs, scraping the floor, and I felt cold air and shadows brush my arms, almost tangible, like icy hands trying to drag me back. Finally, with one final heave, the door burst open. Fog spilled into the cabin, curling around the entity. I ran into the white haze, not daring to look back. Feeling the presence of the cabin trying to pull me in, gripping my mind with whispers and shadows. I ran until I could no longer hear the chants. I stumbled into the fog outside, freezing air biting my skin, branches whipping my face. The cabin behind me looked normal from this distance, just another abandoned wooden structure, but I knew better. The fog was thick, swirling unnaturally, and I could feel the presence of the entity lingering, watching, almost pushing me along a path of its choosing. Every sound was magnified. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, my own frantic breathing. But there was something else. A faint footstep, soft and deliberate, echoing mine, never falling behind, never ahead. I dared not turn around. My instinct screamed to run. But the fog seemed endless, the forest stretching farther than it should. Then I saw movement through the haze, a figure gliding between the trees, limbs bending unnaturally, matching my pace perfectly. My pulse surged. The whispers from the cabin had followed me, now echoing in the empty forest. "You cannot escape." I realized that leaving the cabin wasn't enough. The forest itself had claimed me, and the fog was its tool. I ran blindly, trying to pick a direction. But the forest seemed to shift with every step. Trees moved, shadows lengthened, and the fog thickened, disorienting me. The footsteps never wavered, always behind, circling, echoing, taunting me with every beat of my heart. I tripped over a hidden root, sprawling across the damp leaves. The shadow figure glided over me, bending impossibly, tilting its head as if inspecting me. I scrambled to my feet, pushing myself forward, desperate. The fog became almost tactile, pressing against me, curling around my limbs, slowing me. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, now nearly intelligible. "You cannot leave. The fog will guide you. Forever." I realized the horrifying truth. The forest had no intention of letting me escape. It wasn't just the cabin or the entity. It was every tree, every shadow, every misty breath around me, conspiring to trap me in its cold, spectral embrace. I had to move. There was only one thought in my mind: survive. I pushed forward, lungs burning, legs trembling from exhaustion, the fog thickening with every step. The shadow followed without pause, gliding effortlessly, its elongated limbs bending around trees, over roots, and through mist, moving in ways that defied logic. I could feel its presence, a suffocating pressure pressing on my mind. The whispers were now inside my head, repeating, "You cannot leave. You belong here." Then I stumbled into a small clearing. Moonlight filtered weakly through the fog, revealing the frozen ground and snow-covered branches. For a fleeting moment, it felt like freedom. But the shadow didn't hesitate. It advanced, its form stretching impossibly across the clearing, blocking every path. My heart pounded as I realized that no direction was safe. Instinct overtook fear. I ran toward a faint glimmer of light in the distance, another trail, another chance to escape. The whispers followed, now frantic, almost screaming. "You cannot escape. The fog will claim you." Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself resisted my flight. I sprinted blindly toward the glimmer, branches slapping my face, snow crunching underfoot. The shadow advanced, but suddenly, it seemed to hesitate. The fog swirled violently, disorienting me but also masking my path. I dove into a small ditch, crawling through snow and frozen leaves, heart hammering. The whispers faded slightly, as if the forest was reconsidering its claim. The shadow flitted at the edge of the fog, distorted and hunched, watching but not advancing further. I didn't stop until I reached a dirt logging road, lit faintly by the pale winter moon. The clearing fog revealed the forest as it truly was, silent, cold, and empty. The cabin and its horrors were gone, absorbed back into the mist, leaving only my ragged breaths and shaking limbs. I never returned to that forest, and I never sought solitude in the wilderness again. But sometimes, on foggy nights, I can still hear the whispers in my mind, reminding me that the forest never forgets. My name is Ethan Marshall, and this happened during a solo hiking trip deep in the wilderness of British Columbia. I had planned a 5-day trek through remote trails, far from cell service and civilization. The forest was alive with the sound of winter wind rustling through the tall evergreens and the distant cry of a lone owl. My goal was simple: reach a high ridge overlooking a frozen valley and photograph the untouched wilderness. The first 2 days were peaceful. Snow crunched under my boots, and the sky reflected soft shades of gray and blue through the bare branches. I felt free, disconnected from the world. But on the third night, the sun had long set, and I realized my path was unfamiliar. My compass spun erratically, and a thick fog rolled in, swallowing the trail I had been following. Then I heard it. Faint, deliberate footsteps crunching in the snow behind me. No one should have been there, and the sound didn't belong to any animal I knew. I froze, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then resumed, matching my pace almost perfectly. I whispered my own name, hoping for an echo, but the forest responded only with silence, broken by the crunching of unseen boots behind me. Panic clawed at my chest. I tried to convince myself it was another hiker, lost like me, but the trail was isolated, abandoned for miles. I quickened my pace, my eyes scanning the foggy surroundings. Shadows stretched unnaturally, branches bending like fingers as if the forest itself were watching me. The footsteps mirrored my movements, pausing when I paused, quickening when I ran, always tracking, always patient. I realized I was no longer on a familiar path. Every tree, every boulder seemed distorted, disorienting, as if the forest itself had shifted overnight. And then I heard it, a low, guttural whisper echoing from the mist. "You shouldn't be here." I froze in the snow, my flashlight trembling in my gloved hands. The whisper repeated, low and distorted. "You cannot leave." I spun around, but the fog swallowed everything. There was no sign of anyone, no footprints beyond my own, no movement, nothing human. Yet the footsteps in the snow resumed, slower this time, circling me, never breaking the rhythm of pursuit. Panic surged, and I bolted, heart hammering. My boots sank into the snow, branches scratching my face as I ran blindly. The trail was gone. Every tree looked identical in the fog, and the forest seemed endless. Then I saw it. A dark shape between two trees, hunched and impossibly tall. Its limbs bent in ways that no human body could. I stumbled backward, almost falling, and the figure glided closer, silent, graceful, watching. I screamed into the fog, my voice swallowed instantly. My instincts screamed at me to run, but every direction seemed to narrow, guiding me toward the shape, as if the forest itself were hurting me. I stumbled backward, trying to regain control, but my boots slipped on icy patches, sending me sprawling. The shadow figure halted, tilting its head as if observing, almost mocking my fear. The footsteps multiplied. Now there were several, surrounding me, circling, echoing in the snow, though no one was visible. Panic clawed at me as the fog thickened, pressing in, curling around my body like cold fingers. I fumbled for my backpack, grabbing my emergency whistle and flashlight. I blew the whistle, hoping to startle whatever it was. The fog rippled, and the whispers escalated, louder, unintelligible but undeniably hostile. Then, a faint light appeared, a glow between the trees, warm and inviting. My heart leapt. Was it another hiker or a trick of the fog? The shadow figure froze for a moment, almost hesitant. I had no choice. I ran toward the light, every nerve screaming that it might be my only chance. But the fog and shadows seemed alive, shifting, guiding me toward a path I didn't understand. I sprinted toward the faint light, snow flying under my boots. My lungs burned. My heart pounded as if it wanted to break free of my chest. The fog was thicker than ever, curling around trees and branches like ghostly fingers. The footsteps followed, now relentless, closing in from all directions, echoing off the snow-covered trunks. I could feel the presence surrounding me, almost tangible, pressing against my shoulders and back. I stumbled over a hidden root, scraping my hands on the icy ground, and the shadow figure loomed above me for a fleeting moment, motionless, observing. My flashlight flickered, revealing several other dark forms lurking at the edges of the mist. I realized then that the forest wasn't just a backdrop. It was alive, aware, using the shadows as extensions of its will. Every step I took was anticipated, tracked, and manipulated. Panic clawed at me, but I knew the only chance I had was to keep moving toward the light, even if it meant running blindly into the unknown. I crashed through a thick patch of underbrush, branches slapping my face, snow and ice sticking to my clothes. The shadow figures mirrored every movement, gliding effortlessly over roots, snow, and frozen leaves. I could hear the whispers in my mind, a chaotic cacophony overlapping each other. You cannot escape. The forest remembers. You belong. My legs were shaking, muscles screaming, but I forced myself onward. The glow ahead flickered, revealing the outline of a small clearing, possibly a logging road, my only chance for safety. Then the lead figure moved faster, detaching from the shadows. It towered over me, limbs bending unnaturally, tilting its head in a grotesque imitation of curiosity. I knew I had only seconds before it caught me. I launched myself toward the light, ignoring pain, fear, and fatigue. The shadow lunged, but seemed to fade slightly at the edge of the glow, as though the forest couldn't reach me fully here. I collapsed in the clearing, gasping, praying the warmth of the light would protect me, at least for now. I lay in the clearing for a moment, catching my breath, snow melting in my gloves. The warmth from the faint glow of a distant lantern or campfire offered the illusion of safety, but I knew better. The forest was still alive with presence, the fog curling unnaturally around trees, almost watching. The footsteps hadn't stopped. They now seemed to come from every direction, soft but deliberate, circling me. I could feel the shadows moving in the fog, bending and stretching, always at the periphery of my vision. I stumbled to my feet and forced myself forward, heading toward the glow. Every step was agonizing, as if the snow itself was resisting me. The whispers returned, overlapping, distorted, almost screaming. You cannot leave. The forest remembers. Then I saw movement. A dark shape flitting between the trees, gliding without sound, limbs bending unnaturally, keeping pace with me effortlessly. My pulse surged. I realized the clearing didn't offer safety. It was merely another trap, another illusion crafted by the forest itself. The figure moved closer, a grotesque silhouette bending in ways that no human could. My mind screamed, but my legs kept moving, propelling me toward the distant glow. Branches clawed at my clothes and face, as if the forest itself were trying to restrain me. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in the silence, mingling with the relentless whispers. You cannot escape. You belong. The snow crunched sharply under unseen feet, circling me, closing in. I dared not look directly at the shadow. It seemed to distort reality, bending space, fog, and light around it, creating a labyrinth where the clearing itself shifted with every step. I reached the edge of the clearing and glimpsed a logging road stretching into the darkness. For a moment, I thought I had escaped. But the shadow followed, sliding along the tree's edges, flitting faster than my eyes could track. The forest had not released me. It was testing me, guiding me, keeping me under its control. Every instinct screamed that the climax of this nightmare was imminent. I sprinted onto the logging road, snow crunching under my boots, limbs screaming in protest. The glow ahead grew brighter, revealing the faint outline of a ranger's cabin, possibly abandoned, but at least a solid structure in the chaos of the forest. The shadow followed, gliding between the trees at impossible speed, limbs bending unnaturally, reaching toward me. The whispers were deafening now, vibrating through my skull. You cannot leave. The forest remembers. You belong. I risked a glance backward and saw several forms emerging from the fog, circling the edges of the road, almost invisible in the dim light. Panic surged. I forced myself forward. Branches snagged my jacket, snow buried my boots with every step, but I pushed on. The shadow kept pace, almost taunting me with its silent presence. Finally, I reached the ranger cabin. The door was locked, but I forced it open, collapsing inside and slamming it behind me. The fog thrashed at the windows and walls as if the forest itself were clawing to pull me back outside. Inside the cabin, I sank to the floor, gasping, snow clinging to my clothes, shaking uncontrollably. The shadows had stopped at the tree line, almost hesitant, curling and twisting at the edge of the fog. The whispers faded but lingered in my mind like ice-cold fingers. We remember. I stayed inside until dawn, too afraid to step outside. When morning came, the forest seemed normal, still, silent, as if nothing had happened. No footprints, no fog, only the sun glinting off snow-covered trees. I left the forest immediately, guided by the light of day and the distant sound of a highway. But the memory of the shadows, the whispers, and the fog never left me. Even now, years later, whenever I see mist curling through the trees, I remember the night the forest tried to claim me. I remember the shadows bending, waiting, watching. The wilderness of British Columbia is beautiful, but I learned the hard way. Some places are alive, and some presences never forget.